welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1. And this article is entitled Hyde, Orson. Orson Hyde, I think, is an interesting person. But what I do not understand, and I will not understand ever, is why he has so fewer articles on him than does Orson Pratt. I don't understand it. If you look on my website, I have links of the articles on different people. Orson Hyde has very few articles. It's a small handful, maybe 6 or 7. Orson Pratt has literally dozens and dozens. So I wanted one of the longer ones that I had chosen, and that's why I chose this one. Also, these tend to be relatively comprehensive as far as like that goes. So, but what I don't understand is that why people find Orson Pratt more interesting than Orson Hyde. Because in my mind, they had a similar calling, they had similar situations. Like, I don't understand why. Now, there is a small reason, and that is Orson Pratt was way more prolific than Orson Hyde. Orson Hyde wasn't really a writer, but he was the first apostle, I believe, to go to Jerusalem. Like, I remember that about him. As far as that goes, the other thing was that I remember about Orson Hyde is that he was one of the original 12, and for a really, really long time under Brigham Young, he was the president of the Quorum of the 12. And as you know, Brigham Young served for like ever, like a really, really long time. And eventually, because he had briefly apostatized, I believe, for like 6 months or something like that, in the early days of the church, that Brigham Young then reordered the apostles by how long they had served in the quorum. And since he hadn't served for that short time, that he wasn't really believing what was going on, that he ended up bumping him down the list, making John Taylor president of the Quorum of the 12, who later became the next president of the church. But if I remember correctly, Orson Hyde was still alive when Brigham Young died, and so was Orson Pratt. If I remember correctly. I will correct myself if that is not true, but I wonder sometimes if that reordering wasn't simply to prevent Orson Hyde from becoming president of the church, which is a silly reason if that is the reason. But I sincerely hope it's not. But yeah, anyways, let's take a look at the article. Other than that, I don't feel like I know that many details about his life. So let's take a look at the article. Hyde, Orson, a member of the Council of the 12 Apostles from 1835 to 1878, and president of the Quorum from 1847 to 1875, and that's when they reordered everything, and Brigham Young died in 1877, was born January 8th, 1805, in Oxford, New Haven County, Connecticut. His father, who was an athletic, witty, and talented man, fought and was several times wounded in the U.S. Army, serving in Canada under General Brown and on the frontier in the War of 1812. Wow, military background. His mother, having died when he was 7 years old, Orson and his 8 brothers and 3 sisters, wow, that's a big family, were scattered, and he was placed under the care of a gentleman named Nathan Wheeler, with whom he stayed till 18 years of age. Interesting. So he must have been one of the younger kids then, since he wasn't very old when she died. Mr. Wheeler moved from Derby, Connecticut to Kirtland, Ohio when Orson was 14 years old. The boy had to walk the whole distance, 600 miles, carrying his knapsack, and that's quite a distance to walk. On striking out into the world for himself, he worked at several occupations, a part of the time serving as clerk in the general store of Gilbert and Whitney in Kirtland. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. In 1827, a religious revival had made quite a stir in the neighborhood of Kirtland, and he became converted to the Methodist faith and was appointed as class leader. Subsequently, under the preaching of Sidney Rigdon, he embraced the doctrines of the Campbellites and was baptized by immersion. He then took up his abode in the town of Mentor, Ohio, and commenced a study under the care of Sidney Rigdon and others, becoming proficient in several branches of education. Cool. He then began to preach, assisting in the formation of several Campbellite branches in Lorain and Huron counties, Ohio, over which he was appointed pastor in 1830. Okay, so he was a follower of Sidney Rigdon, who we know had started his own little church, basically. But they didn't really consider themselves a church, I believe, just that they were kind of a placeholder until like somebody with priesthood authority could come. And that's why basically the entire congregation of Sidney Rigdon joined the church at once. Like as soon as Sidney Rigdon did, he was convinced that this is the one, this is where the priesthood came from. Then after that, his entire congregation followed him. So I find that really interesting, that he was one of the higher-ups then in this Campbellite church. That's interesting. In the fall of the year, several Mormons visited the neighborhood, bringing the so-called Golden Bible, of which he read a portion, and by request, he preached against it. Okay, so his initial impression was, no, this isn't real. Yeah? But feeling that he had done wrong, he determined to oppose it no more until he had made further investigation. Okay, so his first knee-jerk reaction was to say, no, it's not true, but that after that he's like, you know what, I really didn't give it a fair enough chance, and then looked at it a little closer. That's nice. He accordingly went to Kirtland to see the prophet Joseph, and there found that Sidney Rigdon and others of his former friends had embraced the new gospel. After decent inquiry, he became himself convinced of its truth, and was baptized by Sidney Rigdon in the fall of 1831, and was confirmed on the same day under the hands of Joseph Smith the prophet. He soon received the witness of the Spirit in a wonderful manner, and began to bear testimony to his former friends. He was ordained a high priest by Oliver Cowdery, October 25, 1831, at a conference held at Orange, Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and took a mission with Elder Hiram Smith among the Campbellites of Ohio, when several branches were organized and many sick people were healed by the laying on of hands. Cool. So he was baptized and then immediately set off on a mission. It always surprises me when people do that. I'm like, wow, how did you do that? That's amazing. In the spring of 1832, in company with Elder Samuel H. Smith, he performed an arduous mission in New York, Massachusetts, Maine, and Rhode Island, traveling 2,000 miles on foot, without purse or scrip. Early in 1833, with Elder Hiram Smith, he took a mission to Pennsylvania and Ohio, baptizing many persons into the church. In the summer of this year, he was appointed, with Elder John Gould, to carry instructions to the saints in Jackson County, Missouri, and went on foot a distance of 1,000 miles, traveling 40 miles a day and swimming the rivers. They performed their mission and returned to Kirtland in November. That is really a lot of work. Like, imagine traveling 40 miles a day by foot. Like how fast do you have to walk to keep up that pace? He subsequently performed another mission to Pennsylvania, in company with Elder Orson Pratt. In May 1834, he started with the company which went to Missouri, calling on the way with Elder Parley P. Pratt to see Governor Daniel Dunklin, to intercede for the restoration to the Missouri saints of the lands from which they had been driven. Okay. So he was trying to get restoration for the saints. That makes sense. Their labor was in vain. Yeah. September 4th, 1834, he married Marinda Ann Johnson, daughter of John and Elsa Johnson, and sister to Luke S. and Lyman E. Johnson. Interesting. So he's related by marriage to the Johnson brothers? Because we will get to them. They're interesting people. In the following winter, he was chosen as one of the 12 apostles, and was ordained to that high and holy calling in Kirtland, Ohio, February 15th, 1835, under the hands of Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. Soon afterwards, okay, so that's when he became a member of the Quorum of the 12, yeah. Soon afterwards, he traveled with his quorum through Vermont and New Hampshire. In 1836, he was sent to the state of New York, and afterwards to Canada, where, in company with Elder Parley P. Pratt, he helped to raise up several branches of the church. Huh. I thought Parley P. Pratt went alone to that mission. But he did go back and forth a couple times, so apparently Orson Hyde went with him at least once, yeah. In the spring of 1837, he went with others to England, where about 1,500 persons were baptized by their united labors. He returned to Kirtland May 22, 1838, and in the summer moved to far west Missouri. Upon the settlement of the Saints in Commerce, afterwards called Nauvoo, he moved there, and at the April Conference in 1840 was sent on a mission to Jerusalem. Yeah, I remember that. That's like the one main thing I remember about him, is that he went on a mission to Jerusalem, yeah? Elder John E. Page was appointed to accompany him, but failed to fulfill the appointment. Yeah, and he was brought to account on it. Like, it was mentioned in General Conference. Like, they brought him forward and asked him to tell them why he didn't go. And he did have reasons, but, like, yeah, they were kind of lame, I'm not gonna lie. He's like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to go. It's like, oh, come on. Alright. And Elder Hyde proceeded alone. He crossed the ocean to England, passed over to Germany, staying in Bavaria to learn the German language. Yeah, just for funsies. Interesting. Went to Constantinople, so why didn't you learn Turkish? You know, also to Cairo and Alexandria. Did you learn Egyptian? I don't know, it's just really interesting. He's like, staying in Bavaria to learn the German language. And how successful were you? Like, you were there, what, 6 months at most? I am sure you were perfectly fluent. I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous. Interesting. After encountering many hardships, reached the Holy City. On the morning of Sunday, October 24th, 1841, he went up on the Mount of Olives and dedicated and consecrated the land for the gathering of Judah's scattered remnants. Yeah, that's a pretty famous thing that he did, yeah, well known. He also erected a pile of stones there as a witness, and one upon Mount Zion, according to a vision given him previous to leaving Nauvoo, and the predictions of the prophet Joseph upon his head. I am a little bit confused about that sentence. And one upon Mount Zion, according to a vision. Okay, so he was given a vision that he would place stones? A pile of stones in Jerusalem? Interesting. And the prediction of the prophet Joseph on his head. He returned home in December 1842. Okay. So he was gone a total of a year and a half? Yeah? So April Conference is when he left, and then he came home in December 1842, so just over a year and a half, so that's like 20 months. Elder Hyde accompanied the saints in the expulsion from Nauvoo, and in 1846 was appointed with elders John Taylor and Parley P. Pratt to go to England and set in order the churches there. Well, a lot of the apostles did at the time, yeah? Like, he solidly wasn't the only one. I mean, they already mentioned John Taylor and Parley P. Pratt. They left their families on the frontier. Elder Hyde took charge of the Millennial Star. Interesting, why him? I would have expected Parley P. Pratt to take it over, but, like, I don't know, I guess he wasn't that into printing. I wonder why he did. While Elders Taylor and Pratt traveled through the conferences. Also, wasn't John Taylor also involved in printing in some way? I'm pretty sure he was. And so I find that interesting that they chose Elder Hyde to be in charge of the Millennial Star. He returned in 1847, and when the pioneers left for the mountains, he remained in charge of the saints at winter quarters, together with apostles George A. Smith and Ezra T. Benson. Yeah, there was that whole general conference. There's an actual conference just from there, because there wasn't organized enough in Salt Lake City to have one there. At least not one that was written down. I mean, if they did, they didn't keep minutes. So, but yeah, they had one in Canesville. It's also called Council Bluffs, as it says there, aka Winter Quarters. Yeah, they had a conference there, and with those three people, George A. Smith, Ezra T. Benson, and Orson Hyde, kind of leading the whole group. So at Canesville, now Council Bluffs, Iowa, he published The Frontier Guardian in the interest of the church, the first number bearing the date February 7th, 1849. Yeah, but like, that's really interesting to me. So he was interested or active, at least, in printing. I don't know that I was aware of that. That is quite interesting. That kind of surprises me. In the interest of the church. Okay, it was the only newspaper published at that time within a radius of 150 miles. Yeah, there was nothing out there. That's why. In 1850, Elder Hyde made his first visit to Utah, returning to Canesville in the fall. Okay, so he visited Utah a couple years later, after he was, in charge of winter quarters. In 1851, he made his second visit to Utah. On this trip, he and a company were attacked by about 300 Pawnee Indians and robbed of considerable property. Wow, that sucks. This occurred on a route never traveled until that season. Well, don't travel it again, yeah. The change of travel was due to unusually heavy rains. Okay. The Elkhorn River being 4 miles wide in May, wagons were unable to cross the river until late in June. Okay, that makes sense. Early immigration came by this new route after traveling in a northwesterly direction for about 400 miles, came to the old traveled road near Old Fort Kearny on the north side of the Platte. He returned to Canesville in the fall. In 1852, he disposed of his printing establishment in Canesville and removed to Utah with his family. So he finally moved there in 1852. But he was asked to stay, so that makes sense. In 1853, he was called to take charge of a company of settlers who located Fort Supply in the Green River country. In 1855, he went in charge of several missionaries to Carson Valley and organized the county, which was then in Utah, but subsequently was included in Nevada. Okay. Carson Valley. Yeah, Carson City is in Nevada, yes. So that must be near there, yeah? Elder Hyde was afterwards sent to take charge of affairs in San Pete County. Okay, so he's just given like a little region to work on. He took up his residence in Spring City and was the leading spirit in that region until his decease. Okay. He was for many years an active member of the Legislative Assembly. Oh, I didn't know that either. At the time of his death, which occurred at his residence in Spring City, San Pete County, Utah, November 28, 1878, he was a member of the committee for the construction of the Manti Temple. Okay, yeah. So he died in 1878. Brigham Young died, and I believe, I'm going to get the month wrong. I think it was August 1877. So, okay, so he would have been the next president of the church. Yeah. That is actually what would have happened if he had continued, if he hadn't been reordered. So I find that interesting. He was a member of the committee for the construction of the Manti Temple. Elder Hyde was a man of great natural ability and by industrious application had acquired a good education, which with his great and varied experience and extended travels rendered him a powerful instrument in the hands of God for the defense and dissemination of the gospel and the building up of the Latter-day work. He left a numerous family and a host of friends. For more detailed life sketch, see Millennial Star, Volume 26, page 742. Okay, also there's a couple pictures which I hadn't mentioned before. There's this one. It's one of his earlier pictures, 1852. So this was right after he got to Utah, yeah? Or maybe right before. So yeah, I feel like he is very distinguished looking, yeah? But maybe it's just the clothes. Maybe it's the vest. But also the hair, like, combed forward. Like, he clearly took an effort on his appearance. But then again, he was getting his portrait taken, so, you know, picture day, you always look nicer. And then there's this picture in 1877. So this was shortly before his death. I feel like, I mean, he's aged, obviously, and his hair has turned gray and stuff. But he still looks like he takes pride in his appearance, you know, trying to be well-groomed. And, you know, the hard frown of the time was because it literally took 5 minutes to take a picture. Like, you couldn't smile because your face would get tired. And it was really hard to stay that still for that long. So I understand that. So I don't really take that too seriously. A lot of people frowned in their pictures. Yeah, so Orson Hyde, there you go. So let's look him up. Let's do a little fact checking. And, here's a little bit of a more, you know, a better copy of the picture that we just looked at. You can see his eyes, at least. It looks like he has light-colored eyes. I'm guessing blue. It's not important, but just an observation. He also has a cleft chin. His little chin dimple. Alright, is it too long? It's not that long, is it? That's a little bit long. It's medium long. Alright, well, let's take a look at it. Orson Hyde, January 8th, 1805 to November 28th, 1878, was a leader in the early Latter-day Saint movement and a member of the First Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He was the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from 1847 to 1875, and was a missionary of the LDS Church in the United States, Europe, and the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, like, okay, so hang on, he dedicated Jerusalem, but he didn't preach there? I find that interesting. I wonder if he wasn't allowed to. Early life. Hyde was born on January 8, 1805, in Oxford, Connecticut, to Nathan Hyde and Sally Thorpe. His father served in the War of 1812, they mentioned that. His mother died when he was 7 years old, and Hyde and his 11 siblings were scattered amongst several foster parents. Yeah, they mentioned that too. In 1812, he moved to Derby, Connecticut, where he was raised under the care of Nathan Wheeler. When he was 14 years old, Hyde walked from Derby, Connecticut to Kirtland, Ohio, where he settled with Wheeler. He was employed as a retail clerk in Kirtland. Hyde joined the local Methodist Church in 1827, and then later affiliated with the Reformed Baptist Society, later Disciples of Christ or Campbellites. He was a Campbellite pastor in Mentor, Ohio in 1830. Okay, so far everything is check, check, check. We talked about all of those things. So, good factual article. I like it. Church membership and service. When Oliver Cowdery and other Latter-day Saint missionaries preached in Kirtland in late 1830, Hyde spoke publicly against the Book of Mormon. Yeah, remember his initial knee-jerk reaction was, this can't be true, yeah? However, when his former minister, Sidney Rigdon, joined the Church of Christ, Hyde investigated the claims of the missionaries and was baptized by Rigdon in October 1831. Okay, so once he took the time to look at it, yeah? Rigdon and Joseph Smith ordained him as an elder later that month, okay, and Oliver Cowdery ordained him as a high priest on the 26th of October. Hyde was called and appointed to serve on a succession of missions for the church, alongside Hiram Smith, Samuel H. Smith, and John Gould. Yeah, they mentioned all of those things. So far, so good. His first mission call was extended in November 1831 to preach the gospel in Orange, Ohio. Then he was again called in January 1832 to go with Samuel H. Smith to take their journey into the eastern countries and proclaim the gospel to the inhabitants there. Okay. His mission proved successful as he baptized many during that time in the eastern states, which included Connecticut, Maine, and Massachusetts. Okay. During one trip, Hyde traveled about 2,000 miles on foot between New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Maine. I don't know how you keep track of stuff like that. He discussed his new faith with his old Campbellite acquaintances during these missions. Hyde was present for the founding of the School of the Prophets in 1833. He then marched with Zion's Camp in 1834 and became one of the members of the first presiding High Council in Kirtland, Ohio. Okay. I feel like I had heard somewhere that he had marched with Zion's Camp, but I had forgotten that. Yeah, that makes sense, though. He was ordained an apostle on the church on February 15th, 1835, as one of the original Quorum of the 12, being fifth in seniority. Yeah, by age, you mean. He was fifth by age. Yeah. He was born in 1805, and Brigham Young was born in 1801, so that made him older. Yeah. David Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, and Martin Harris performed Hyde's ordination. Yeah. The three witnesses. We talked about this. The three witnesses chose the first Quorum of the 12 because Joseph Smith didn't want anyone to think that he was biased. And so he chose someone else. He delegated that to choose that. Okay, after becoming an apostle, Hyde served additional missions to Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, and Canada. He also embarked on a mission with Heber C. Kimball to Great Britain in 1837, returning home in 1838. Their efforts were successful in bringing approximately 1,500 converts to the faith. Okay, so far so good. Like, these are all things that we talked about already. Upon returning from Britain, Hyde found the church in a period of persecution and internal dissension. He traveled to Missouri, where he fell sick enough to be bedbound. Okay, they didn't mention that. Thomas B. Marsh and his family took Hyde in and cared for him away from the violence surrounding the rest of the church members, and as they did, a grudge they had against the church poisoned his perspective. Okay, so here's where he left the church. Okay, so it was, wow, that was right around the Thomas B. Marsh period? Huh. Marsh then swore out an affidavit before the Justice of the Peace in Ray County, Missouri, stating that the Latter-day Saints there had organized a vigilante group who have taken an oath to support the heads of the church in all things they say or do, whether right or wrong. That church vigilantes had burned and looted non-Mormon settlements in Daviess County, and that the plan of said Smith, the prophet, is to take this state, and he professes to his people to intend taking the United States and ultimately the whole world. Gosh, that's so ridiculous. This is the belief of the church and my own opinion of the prophet's plans and intentions. Oh gosh. Bedbound, sick, and isolated, Hyde swore before the same justice on the same day that he either knew Marsh's statements to be true or believed them to be such. Okay, that explains why he was bumped down in the Quorum of the 12. Okay. No, I kind of feel like that's justified then, because he literally swore statements that made it more difficult for the saints at the time. I mean, the church was already struggling, and then it just got worse, like, because they swore these statements. So what Thomas B. Marsh, like, I recently made a video on Thomas B. Marsh, so this is pretty fresh in my mind. The issue there was not the cup of cream story, which we do talk about in that video, but it is actually that this is the actual reason he apostatized. He swore this affidavit against the church, saying that they had a vigilante group which was called the Danites, and the Danites had attacked a little Missouri town called Gallatin, and Thomas B. Marsh was horrified by this, and he was convinced that it was sanctioned by the church, and that was the reason why it was allowed to happen. But as far as I was able to discover, there's no real evidence suggesting that it was sanctioned by the church. But I couldn't say one way or the other. I just am taking into account what I find. So I'm only as good as my sources, So as far as that goes, I don't know if that was sanctioned by the church or not, but what I do know is that is what caused Thomas B. Marsh to turn against the church, and it sounds like Orson Hyde as well. So I find that really interesting. It was this attack on Gallatin, which was mostly women and children at the time, the men having gone off somewhere. Yeah. Because he had signed the Richmond affidavit with Marsh, Hyde was disfellowshipped, disciplined but not removed from membership in 1838. On May 4th, 1839, he was removed from the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Okay, yeah, that makes sense why he was reordered then. The church leadership invited Hyde to explain his actions. On June 27th, Hyde returned to the church and publicly explained himself, recanting his affidavit and asking to be restored. So that was, what, a year later? 27. Yeah, I think so. It was around a year later-ish. All right. Yeah. He was readmitted to the quorum the same day in Nauvoo, Illinois. Okay, so his apostasy was connected then to Thomas B. Marsh's apostasy. That's interesting. All right, mission to Jerusalem, which I think was kind of the highlight of his life, was it not? As early as 1832, when he was a newly baptized member of the church, eager to know the will of the Lord, Hyde sought direction from Joseph Smith, whom he considered to be a prophet. Okay, why did they include that part? Like, we know that. I don't know. Like, that's just, I don't know. Like, there's a fine line between explaining something so the lay person who's not a member of the church who reads it might understand it, and then explaining it so much that you kind of are beating a dead horse here. Yeah, I think Joseph Smith, being the leader of the church and known as the prophet, is fairly well known. I'm just putting that out there. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but, that's just my impression. In a blessing Hyde received in 1832 at the hands of Smith, Hyde was told, "Thou shalt go to Jerusalem, and be a watchman unto the house of Israel, and by thy hands shall the Most High do a good work, which shall prepare the way, and greatly facilitate the gathering together of that people." Okay. 8 years after receiving this blessing, Orson Hyde had a vision in March 1840, in which the Spirit told him he was to visit the cities of London, Amsterdam, Constantinople, and Jerusalem. Okay, that's a list of cities, none of which are in Bavaria. I wonder why he stopped in Bavaria for so long. That's just interesting to me. He was just wanted to learn the language, I guess. It's kind of random. Like, that's not when you should be working on that, but okay. And that in Jerusalem he was to declare to those of Judah that they must gather together, assemble yourselves, and go into the defenced cities. 1 month after this vision, on April 6, 1840, Orson Hyde spoke at a church general conference in Nauvoo, Illinois. In his address, Hyde said that it had been prophesied some years ago, referring to his 1832 blessing, that he had a great work to perform among the Jews, and that he had been recently moved upon by the Spirit of the Lord to visit that people. When Hyde concluded speaking, Joseph Smith motioned to those in attendance at the conference and resolved that Hyde should proceed on a mission to Jerusalem. This Hyde did with a prayer on October 24th, 1841, in which he dedicated the Holy Land for the return of the Jews. Cool. So that was the prophesied thing that happened to him. That's pretty cool. According to the minutes from the April 6, 1840 General Conference at which Hyde was dispatched, Elder John E. Page then arose and spoke with much force on the subject of Elder Hyde's mission. And on the last day of conference, Joseph Smith stated that since Elder Hyde had been appointed to visit the Jews, he had felt an impression that it would be well for Elder John E. Page to accompany him on his mission. Okay. The two elders, Hyde and Page, left Nauvoo and embarked on their mission on 15 April 1840. For the following months, Elder Hyde and Page traveled as circumstances allowed, sometimes together and at other times apart. In the end, however, Page failed to accompany him all the way to Jerusalem. They parted ways when Hyde waited for Page in New York City for several months, but Page never arrived, so Hyde set out for Jerusalem alone, as he had foreseen in his vision. His letter of introduction claimed that the Jewish nations have been scattered abroad among the Gentiles for a long period, and in our estimation the time of the commencement of their return to the Holy Land has already arrived. He left the United States and traveled through Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and Egypt before arriving in Jerusalem. He stayed in Bavaria for a while to learn the German language. See, I still don't understand that. Okay. It's not very focused, yeah? It's not to the purpose of the mission. That's all I mean. Not that that's a bad thing to do, it's just that that's not why you're there, you know? That's all I'm saying. Hyde was only in Jerusalem for a few days, yeah. He arrived there on Thursday, October 21st, 1841, and stayed until Monday, October 25th, 1841. He recorded that before dawn on October 24th, 1841, he climbed up to the Mount of Olives, overlooking the city, and then wrote and recited a prayer, part of which reads, "Now, O Lord, thy servant has been obedient to the heavenly vision which thou gavest him in his native land, and under the shadow of thine outstretched arm he has safely arrived in this place to dedicate and consecrate this land unto thee, for the gathering together of Judah's scattered remnants, according to the predictions of the holy prophets, for the building up of Zion again after it has been trodden down by the Gentiles so long, and for rearing a temple in honor of thy name. Everlasting thanks be ascribed unto thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou hast preserved thy servant from the dangers of the seas, and from the plague and pestilence which have caused the land to mourn. The violence of man has also been restrained, and thy providential care by night and by day has been exercised over thine unworthy servant. Accept, therefore, O Lord, the tribute of a grateful heart for all past favors, and be pleased to continue thy kindness and mercy toward a needy worm of the dust." Interesting. I don't know, that's interesting. I don't know if I would have said it that way, but sure. Having dedicated Jerusalem for the gathering of the Jews, Hyde departed, and the mountain, after building a small altar with stones. Nearly a year later, Orson Hyde returned to America. He traveled back by way of Regensburg, Germany, where he spent a number of months working on a church publication in German. Okay. What year was that? 1842? Yeah, but the first German publication was in 1869, so that's interesting. Maybe it was just pamphlets and stuff. That's possible. He finally arrived home to his wife and two daughters in Nauvoo on December 7th, 1842, having been gone for a few months shy of 3 years. Okay, I miscounted. I was saying 1.5 years, but it's 2.5 years. Okay. Since Orson Hyde's dedicatory mission, the Holy Land has been formally dedicated for the return of Judah and the house of Israel in at least 10 other dedicatory prayers. That's a lot of prayers, geez. The Orson Hyde Memorial Garden on the Mount of Olives was dedicated in 1979. The park was funded by donations to the Orson Hyde Foundation through the Jerusalem Foundation. The sign at the front of the Orson Hyde Memorial Garden was created by the Israeli government. Really? However, it contains several mistakes that are common misconceptions about Hyde's mission to Jerusalem. Really? 1. Unlike most other missions, Hyde was not called to preach the gospel in Jerusalem, but to dedicate the land for the gathering of Judah. Okay. And 2. Hyde was only in Jerusalem for several days, although it is true that he was traveling to and from Jerusalem during the years 1841 to 42. Okay. Okay, like that's fine. Interesting that they actually have a plaque put up by the government that is incorrect. Like, you have incorrect information on it. That's, why would they put up a plaque? It's really interesting to me. Family life. Hyde married Marinda Nancy Johnson in Kirtland, Ohio on September 4th, 1834. Joseph Smith was sealed to Marinda as a plural wife either in April 1842 or in May 1843. Okay, Marinda signed an affidavit saying that her sealing to Joseph Smith occurred in May 1843. Okay. I don't know why that's important, but okay. However, one of Smith's scribes, Thomas Bullock, later wrote a list of plural marriage dates in the back of one of Smith's journals and noted a sealing date of April 1842. Okay, so there are two different sources with two different dates, and that's why they're not sure which one it is. It is not clear when or if Hyde learned about his wife's sealing to Smith. Oh, because he wasn't back yet. Well, in May 1843 he would have been, but not in April 1842. So, okay. He wasn't back from Jerusalem. That's interesting. Huh. That surprises me. However, John D. Lee, in his book Mormonism Unveiled, reported that Hyde may have given his consent. He may have. Yeah. I think that's probably more likely, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, 3 months after his return from his mission, Hyde learned about plural marriage and married 2 additional wives. Okay, so so if it was May 1843 and not April 1842, then he definitely knew about it, and he married several plural wives at the same time, and therefore he probably gave his consent to the marriage of Joseph Smith to the sealing of Joseph Smith to his wife. Okay, interesting. He ultimately took 8 wives and fathered 32 children. He and Johnson divorced in 1870. Wow, late in life. They were together a long time. They got divorced in 1870? Huh. I mean, something must have happened. Like, that doesn't just happen out of nowhere. Like, there was some sort of catalyst. That's interesting. Huh. Speaking from personal experience, I'm just saying. There is always a catalyst. Something that made the difference. Later life. Hyde served on the Nauvoo City Council from 1843 to 1845 and joined the Council of 50 on March 13, 1844. After Joseph Smith's death in 1844, he oversaw the completion of the Nauvoo Temple, which was dedicated in 1846 just before the church members left for the Iowa Territory. Really? Wow. Like, why don't people mention this when they talk about Orson Hyde? Like, they all talk about Jerusalem, but dude, this is more important. He completed the Nauvoo Temple. Oversaw the completion of the Nauvoo Temple. That was a big deal back then. Wow. That should be more well known, in my opinion. Like, that does not have the notoriety that it ought to have. He moved with them to the staging grounds at Council Bluffs, Iowa for their trek west and oversaw their emigration to Utah. He was then sent to England, presiding over the British mission from 1846 to 1847. During this trip, he also served as editor of the Millennial Star, the Latter-day Saint publication in England. Upon his return to the United States, he became president of the Quorum of the Twelve in 1847. That was when Brigham Young reorganized the first presidency. Hyde was placed in charge of the church in the Midwest, remaining in Council Bluffs, Iowa, until 1852. Yep. We talked about that already. He published the Frontier Guardian, in Council Bluffs. He then joined the main body of the church in Utah Territory in 1852. Hyde served as an associate judge for Utah Territory for the U.S. Supreme Court, beginning in 1852. That is impressive. Although I have to ask, it's a stupid question, I know, but I have to ask the question, what made him qualified to be a judge? Because as far as I'm reading here, he was not a lawyer. So if he was not a lawyer, why did he become a judge? Just asking the question. I'm guessing that was not prerequisite to be a judge. However, I do find that a little bit short-sighted. If you have judges who aren't familiar enough with the law to become a lawyer, and then they are judges? I'm just throwing that out there. During the settlement of the territory, Brigham Young called Hyde to lead settlement groups to Carson Valley, Nevada, and San Pete Sevier District in Utah. He also led an expedition to the Green River in 1853. Hyde was a member of the Manti Temple Building Committee and the Utah Territorial Assembly until he went to settle Spring City, Utah. Yeah, we mentioned all of these things so far, so I'm just moving on. When dealing with the question of seniority in the Council in 1875, long after the death of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young ruled that if a council member had been disciplined and removed from the council, his seniority was based on the date of readmission. Yeah. By this ruling in June 1875, both Hyde and Apostle Orson Pratt were moved down in quorum seniority. So, when Hyde repented in 1839, he effectively joined the quorum as a new member. As a result of this ruling, John Taylor replaced Hyde as president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1875. Okay, and now that I have learned more about how that went down, I'm kind of with Brigham Young on this one, which isn't always the case, and Brigham Young is interesting. All right, death and legacy. Hyde died in Spring City on November 28, 1878, at 72 years of age. He was succeeded by Moses Thatcher in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He is buried at Spring City. Hyde is mentioned by name in 6 sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, sections 68, 75, 100, 102, 103, and 124. In his Latter-day Saint Biographical Encyclopedia, Andrew Jenson describes Hyde as a man of great natural ability and by industrious application had acquired a good education, which, with his great and varied experiences and extended travels, rendered him a powerful instrument in the hands of God for the defense and dissemination of the gospel and the building up of the latter-day work. Yep, and we just read that, so we don't need to reread it. It's interesting that they quoted from the article we just read, though. Like, I didn't expect that. I did not realize that that would happen. So, that's a surprise. Sometimes I get surprised by the fact that a lot of these articles are quoted in the Wikipedia article. I find that always fascinating. It's like, well, I guess they were accepted as, historically accurate enough for Wikipedia anyway. Yeah? Okay, in the references, there's also a mention of Elder Orson Hyde's letter, his prayer of dedication on the Mount of Olives, which is quoted probably in full, I haven't double-checked this, but probably, in History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Volume 4, page 454. That is by Joseph Smith. Yes, History of the Church. Interesting. Further reading. Okay, we have a couple of books about him. Orson Hyde, A Voice from Jerusalem. Hyde's account of his mission to Germany, Constantinople, and Jerusalem. Beatrice Spade, Prayer of Orson Hyde on the Mount of Olives, Sunday morning, October 24th, 1841, Traveling to Jerusalem, Seminar Papers, 1997 to 2003, Colorado State University, Pueblo. Okay. And then the same author, Orson Hyde, Traveling to Jerusalem, Seminar Papers, 1997 to 2003, same source. Okay. Cool. All right. So if you're interested, go ahead and take a look at Beatrice Spade and her work on Orson Hyde. I found that really interesting. I'm still not sure why that his life is less interesting than Orson Pratt's, but we will hopefully find out when we read about Orson Pratt in a couple of weeks. And but I do find this really fascinating that so much is like that he did so much. He really did. I mean, he just was very, very active person. And yet I feel like he doesn't receive the notoriety that he deserved at the time. I'm just saying. I feel like he ought to be better known than he is. That's a little sad for me. But Orson Hyde, everyone. That was really fascinating. I really enjoyed that, and I hope you did too. And if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.